Queen Elizabeth's legacy is one of much topic around the world. Her memory is one that is highly cherished today. She has lived on to become a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. It was important to her that her children picked up her dedication to duty and service, and passed these down to subsequent generations after her.
The Queen talked to Princess Anne's children, not about the baby, but about a new puppy.
It's called Dash. Dash. And you know the word you use when you're cross. Dash. It comes out frightfully well as a dog's name, see.
They have all made separate names for themselves, but one thing among them is common: the love they have for their mother and the importance of goodness instilled into them since birth.
Now more people than ever are willing to do something to keep a child safe. And last year, an incredible 81% of adults agreed that they personally are willing to take action to protect children.
Was working with children something that you had wanted to do?
No. And I don't regard children in that light at all. It was more the idea of what you could do for them, not actually working with them.
I thought I'd come and stand over here, give everybody who's got a crick in the neck looking that way a bit of relief.
I was most touched to have been invited to join you for this occasion and to have an opportunity to express once again just how much my family and I care about what I can only imagine must have seemed like an apocalyptic vision of hell.
4 children: duty-focused Charles, hard-working Anne, scandal-ridden Andrew, and sensitive Edward. Here are the Queen's 4 children.
I'm naturally somewhat biased, but I think our children have done rather well under very different and difficult and demanding circumstances. I hope we can be forgiven for feeling rather proud of them. And I'm also encouraged to see what a good start the next generation is making. I think that the main lesson that we've learned is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. It may not be quite so important when things are going well, but it is absolutely vital when things get difficult. And you can take it from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance and abundance.
Probably one of the most frequently quoted speeches that the Queen ever gave was when, on her 21st birthday, she dedicated her life to duty, and she certainly fulfilled that. I think she fulfilled it 1,000,000 times over.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. But I shall not have strength to carry out this resolution alone unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do. I know that your support will be unfailingly given. God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it.
She made the pledge and she really meant it. And it got her through life.
So let me just now repeat that statement from the royal household, which we have received in the last few minutes. It reads: "The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow." And so the reign of Elizabeth II comes to a close after 70 years at the age of 96. Her son Charles is now king.
In September 2022, the royal family gathered at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. It was the end of the Elizabethan era. After a long reign of 70 years, Queen Elizabeth II passed away at the age of 96, after a decline in health over the last couple of months. All 4 of her children, Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, were present. Charles and Anne were already with their mother when the news broke, whilst Andrew and Edward flew to Scotland. Many of us wish to see our children's children when we die. She has become a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother at her death. She has witnessed some of the most dramatic changes throughout her reign and is widely applauded for her duty to the Commonwealth. She would become known to be the longest reigning monarch in British history, and to this day, many still continue to mourn her death. The man formerly known as Prince Charles officially became king at his mother's death. But even before his reign as King Charles III began, he had carved out quite a presence for himself as a working royal, taking on a host of responsibilities for the nation and campaigning for issues close to him, including solutions to climate change. He has had experiences only few could imagine.
I think that probably the shock of his mother's very sudden death and him becoming king, when these things happen, you go into slight shock, so you act quite mechanically. It sort of protects you in a way. So I think he wouldn't have been overwhelmed at that moment. He would have been very emotional, but he would have kept it all in check. So I think he dealt with it on a very professional level, which would be really the only way to deal with something of that enormity happening to you.
On behalf of all my family, I can only offer the most sincere and heartfelt thanks for your condolences and support. They mean more to me than I can ever possibly express. And to my darling Mama, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you.
The first rendition in St. George's Chapel of God Save the King, I think he nearly lost it. It was so emotional, and the strong voices and the choir and everybody really, really meant God Save the King.
Charles was born on the 14th of November 1948. As a young boy, he was seen to be more of an introverted child. He was often separated from his mother, the Queen, due to long trips abroad and her various royal duties.
The early years of marriage have set the seal on the happiness of the princess and her husband. The blessing of children has come not only to enrich their lives, but also to establish securely the line of succession. In Prince Charles, the public has acquired a new popular subject of interest, of whom some delightful pictures have been taken.
Well, I think that Charles, when he was Prince of Wales, he created a role for himself, and he fulfilled it extremely well. He used to give a lot of interviews. He said, there is no role for the Prince of Wales, so I'm going to create one. And he did. You know, he earned the great, great respect of his parents because he was a very awkward, shambolic child, odd teenager, difficult, shy, but he had this real simpatico and warmth, and he won people over. He created a role, and he's a workaholic. For him, there is never enough hours in the day to do all the thing he wants to do, and I think that's why he's been so successful, and I think that's what will make him such a compassionate and understanding king.
During his early years, the prince allegedly struggled to make friends. Being the heir to the throne, he often found himself at the mercy of bullies. They ridiculed him for his protruding ears and called the prince Fatty. In an attempt to help Charles build his character, Philip sent his boy to Gordonston in 1962. His experience at the Scottish institution remains a point of contention. Philip had a strict parenting style, and the poor young Charles felt he had much to do in order to please his father. But this push really did make Charles achieve a name for himself throughout his adolescence. He has become the longest-serving heir apparent in British history.
Focus on a famous prep school. Cheam is in the news on the first day of a new term, and young hopefuls arrive with their parents and relatives to carry on with that exhausting process called education. Accent on luggage, not forgetting tuck boxes and toys. Toys, well, super yachts and jet-propelled planes, one should say, perhaps. It's a wizard idea to bag your place in the classroom at once. Everybody here? Call over by Mr. Beck, joint headmaster of the school. No, there's one new boy still to arrive, and here he comes with his mother and father. The headmaster receives the royal party. What, no tuck box? Well, there's plenty of room in that trunk, no doubt. Prince Philip was a pupil here. His son looks happy to be following in father's footsteps. The great court of Trinity College, Cambridge, and the royal procession arrives. The minis serve to underline Prince Charles' hope that his time at Cambridge will be uncluttered by deference to his royal status. Lord Butler, the master of Trinity, set a precedent by meeting him, but otherwise the college, founded by Henry VIII, welcomed him with the informality he obviously hoped for. The prince, who'll be 19 next month, will be reading archaeology and anthropology. The first Prince of Wales to attend the university for 100 years, he'll be living in a room in New Court, and it was here he met a friend of his, third-year student Robert Woods, son of the Dean of Windsor. A stroll to the backs for a look at the gently flowing Cam. In the Elizabethan dining hall, lunch 3 bob. There he saw windows dedicated to his great-great-grandfather and his grandfather, who were both up at Trinity.
Like many royals, Charles served in the Royal Navy, including as a helicopter pilot.
In steaming heat, Prince Charles's frigate, HMS Minerva, edged her way into Nassau Harbour. A few minutes before, he had formally ended his duties as one of the ship's navigation officers and taken on the role again of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, with his personal standard broken from the mast. In the month that he's been with Minerva in the Caribbean, he several times visited the Bahamas Islands, but this was the first time he'd made an official visit. To get to Rawson's Place, where the welcome speeches would be made, the prince walked at speed through an aisle of shouting, yelling Bahamians, with security men running in front to clear a path for him. If it was all a bit confused, the prince showed no sign of being put out by it. The speeches were from a dais placed in front of the old Nassau landmark, the statue of the prince's great-great-great-grandmother, and were brief to the relief of those in full dress with the temperature in the 90s. There will be 5 days of ceremonial engagements before Prince Charles rejoins Minerva next Wednesday for 2 more months of Caribbean patrol as a naval lieutenant.
Prince Charles stepped out from the Fleet Air Arms headquarters at Yeovilton in Somerset today in perfect flying weather for his first hour's instruction at the controls of a Wessex Mark V helicopter. It's the start of a 3.5-month flying course, at the end of which he'll be qualified, like his father Prince Philip, to fly helicopters, including those belonging to the Queen's flight. With his instructor, Lieutenant Commander Alan McGregor, the Prince inspected the helicopter before climbing inside. He seemed already familiar with the controls and was relaxed and cheerful before this, his first dual-control training flight. After about 18 hours of instruction, Lieutenant the Prince of Wales, as he's officially known, will make his first solo flight. He'll also do mountain flying, armaments training, including the firing of guided missiles, and emergency escape drill from a cockpit that's immersed in water and turned upside down.
if later on I'm to be associated with all three services, it'd be a very good idea to do an attachment with each one. I think it gives one a very useful experience of responsibility and discipline. I think responsibility is the most important thing. It's the actual trust that's put in you to deal with other people, and the feeling that they can perhaps put their trust in you as well.
He married Lady Diana Spencer in St. Paul's Cathedral in 1981, and they had 2 children together, William and Harry. But the couple divorced in 1996, just a year before Diana was involved in a fatal car crash, leaving behind her devastated sons. In 2005, Charles married the woman he had always been in love with since the very beginning, Camilla Parker Bowles, who became the Duchess of Cornwall and is now the Queen Consort. The young boy bullied is now a king thriving.
Well, I don't really think Camilla ever wanted to be queen. I don't think, well, she certainly didn't envisage such a busy life at the age of 75. I mean, Camilla's used to a much more leisurely country life, so I think it's going to be quite hard for her. The Queen saw the change in Camilla, and she saw her dedication to duty, and she also saw her dedication to Charles, because she so helps him, and he wants her at his side, and she will be at his side. So she's almost in a Queen Mother type of role.
I like her. I got on with her. I think she'll make an excellent queen. I've always thought that. I think monarchy will evolve. It has to evolve going forward. But I think they're doing quite a good job of how it's changing. I think they're doing it very carefully and subtly, and I think it'll carry on changing and evolving. I think it has to in order to survive. They are the best of friends. They are a team. Everything about them is just great, and there's nothing false about it. There's nothing made up. It's what you all see is what I saw. It's a real love between them. They laugh. Wow, they laugh so much together, which is great to see as well. And they're just comfortable around each other. They're very comfortable, very much. I mean, what's wonderful is they've obviously known each other for such a long time. They are the best of friends. I remember kind of thinking that, to be in that kind of relationship, that's what everyone really wants from a partner, is you want to be in a relationship like that, where you've got I suppose you're married to your best friend.
Charles shared his childhood experiences with his younger sister Anne, his assertive opposite. Confident and extroverted, very much her father's daughter. The Queen taught them to ride when they were toddlers. Charles was timid on horseback, while Anne was bold. Anne was born on the 15th of August 1950, 2 years after her brother. She is the only daughter of Queen Elizabeth. At the time, male primogeniture was in place, so although Anne was the second child of Elizabeth, any younger brothers that Anne would have would immediately skip ahead of her in the line of succession. Male primogeniture used to serve as protocol for the royal family from the Act of Settlement of 1701 up until 2013. Then the Succession of the Crown Act of 2013, which ensured a female heir cannot be surpassed in the line to the throne by a younger male heir, only applied to royals born after October the 28th, 2011.
We've got to remember that Princess Anne was second in line to the throne at one point after Charles. But gradually, I think she's now 16th. As other members of the royal family are born, new generations go down the original line, Prince Charles, she gets further and further away. But I think in many ways, Princess Anne was very happy to be the spare. We have this idea that, it's not a great thing to be the spare, but in fact, the responsibilities of being the heir, I think, are tremendous. She and certainly Edward, and I think to a certain extent Andrew, were quite happy that it was their older brother who, in a sense, was being trained for kingship.
Like Charles, Anne also fell victim to Philip's strict parenting style. But being the more extroverted one meant that she would be able to brush his words off. Charles, on the other hand, was much more sensitive.
Princess Anne was, I think her childhood was still quite old-fashioned, you know, a child born up in the 1950s. She's very similar to Prince Philip. She's very direct. She has a very strong sense of public duty. She's pretty fearless. She's very much a man's woman and close to her father. She was much more of a tomboy, rough and tumble. Charles was a more sensitive soul, and in some ways she sort of dominated him. It's now a very good relationship, and I think he relies on her judgment and her support. But I think at the time, though she was 2 years younger, she sort of dominated that relationship as a child. Well, Princess Anne is the second child of the Queen, born in 1950, so 2 years after Prince Charles. And, you know, when she was born, the Queen actually hadn't come to the throne, and indeed Anne could almost have been at the coronation. Her brother was, but she was just a little bit too young. So it's a slightly difficult, in some ways, upbringing. She was educated by governesses in Buckingham Palace. She was then sent away to school, to Benenden, which is a well-known English public school. Didn't go to university, but clearly was a very able horsewoman. And really had a career originally as an equestrian, winning awards and representing Britain at the Olympics in 1976.
And what's your personal reaction to having the princess come here?
I think it is a very great honor for us, and I hope a great opportunity.
May I ask you finally about your own feelings on discipline? Suppose a girl does something that's against the rules, what happens to her?
It depends what the misdemeanor happens to be. We deal with such misdemeanors ad hoc. Usually a talking to in the right way is all that is necessary. Otherwise, we deal with it according to what it is.
Have you ever expelled a girl?
Never so far.
Were you nervous? Were you nervous about going to public school?
No, I think I did actually quite look forward to it, in many ways.
And how did they treat you? Was there any bullying done? I imagine there wasn't really, knowing you. Or at least being aware of you.
I wasn't that big a girl. No, I don't think so. No, I wasn't really aware of any. I didn't exactly set out to. I was very quiet.
During her childhood and teenage years, she has grown up to become a keen equestrian, much like her mother, who grew up passionate about horses. Anne won gold and silver medals at the European Eventing Championships and became the first member of the royal family to take part in the 1976 Olympics, Montreal.
Well, Princess Anne has always been deeply involved in the Olympics. She competed there in 1976. She's on the British Committee. She indeed, for a time, was on the International Committee. And indeed picked up on behalf of Britain the flame to bring back to Britain. So she's very involved in these sort of sports charities. The royal family have always had this great love affair with horses. The Queen raced horses. She rode until she was in her 90s. And Princess Anne inherited this love of horses, was fearless as a child, and was a very talented horsewoman. And as a result, was representing her country at various three-day events in this country, at the Olympics. And so horses became very much her life. It's how she met her husband, Mark Phillips. He was also an equestrian representing the country, and this was a shared bond with her mother.
For the last 4 years, she's been coached and trained by Mrs. Alison Oliver.
Princess Anne's just loosening him up now, having stretched out. She's just loosening him up now before working him, and then when he's warmed up and sufficiently supple, we'll start doing some gymnastic work over jumps.
Doublet, who would go to Munich with the princess if she's selected, was originally a present from the Queen, the same horse on which Anne won the European three-day championships last year.
Coming in, if you can keep your hands level and keep the legs, so he's not coming back a little higher than the hat.
In the business, Princess Anne has a reputation of being a good competitor with a lot of endurance and a dislike of not winning. Mrs. Oliver feels that she's managed to help boost her confidence.
A shared interest in equestrian sport brought Anne together with her first husband, Captain Mark Phillips, an army officer whom she married on November 14, 1973, in Westminster Abbey. Phillips was a commoner and never took a title of nobility, with the result that his and Anne's two children were called simply Peter and Zara Phillips. Peter was born on November 15, 1977, and Zara on May 15, 1981.
Princess Anne and Mark Phillips were determined that their children would have a very normal, ordinary upbringing. Mark Phillips refused an earldom, which was traditionally given to people marrying into the royal family. And I think they just felt that in a modern democracy, this didn't really fit. And as a result, both Peter Phillips, their eldest child, and Zara Phillips do not have titles. Their children do not have titles. They're not working royals. They've had to make their own living. And they've lived very much under the radar.
The hospital was under tight security today, with pressmen and well-wishers kept well back from the entrance. In fact, it was hospital staff who found themselves with the best view. Before leaving, the princess stopped to thank the midwives and staff. Captain Phillips, hidden behind the nurses, leant forward and gave his daughter a rather bemused smile. The princess, joking with the nurses, said, "She's quiet, isn't she?" A reference to the fact that the new baby hadn't given her much time to sleep over the weekend.
Unfortunately, like her brother, this marriage was not one that would last. Anne obtained a divorce from Phillips in April 1992, and in December of the same year, she married Commander Timothy Lawrence, a naval officer and former aide to Queen Elizabeth.
Well, the marriage to Mark Phillips was, to a large extent, successful initially, but they both had affairs. I think they found that they were not totally compatible, despite their shared love of riding. He had a child with a woman in Australia, which only came to light some years later. The girl's called Heather Tonkin. Also, she fell in love with an equerry to the Queen, a man called Tim Lawrence. And as soon as she divorced Mark Phillips in 1992, she married Tim Lawrence. But she wasn't allowed to get married in England, so she got married in Scotland.
Taking from her brother, Anne lent her support to various charities as well, most notably as president of Save the Children UK since 1970. In March 1974, she was nearly kidnapped when a mentally disturbed gunman attacked the car in which she was riding, wounding her bodyguard and the chauffeur.
Shots have been fired at Princess Anne and Captain Phillips. They escaped, but 4 people were hit, 1 seriously. Good evening. There's been an assassination attempt on Princess Anne and Captain Mark Phillips, but they escaped unhurt. The gunman opened fire on their car 200 yards from Buckingham Palace. Their private detective, their chauffeur, and a policeman on point duty were wounded in the shooting. So was a man who was walking past. The policeman was shot in the stomach and is undergoing an emergency operation. Princess Anne and Captain Phillips escaped injury, although a spokesman from Buckingham Palace said they're obviously very shaken. Shooting happened at the top of the Mall as they were returning from a private film show in aid of the Riding for the Disabled Association. Their car, a maroon Rolls-Royce, was forced into the side of the road by a white Ford Escort, which blocked their route to the palace, and a man jumped out and started shooting. At least 5 shots were fired at their car, and the bullets shattered the windows of a passing taxi.
Princess Anne has a very dry humour. I mean, there was an occasion just recently where she was instructing her mother about doing a Zoom call during COVID. And her mother said, "Well, I've got 4 of you up, I can't see you." And Princess Anne said, "Well, it doesn't matter, you know what I look like." But there's a famous occasion when there was an attempt to kidnap her during the 1970s when she was returning to Buckingham Palace down the Mall. And the man, basically with a shotgun and was shooting policemen, opened the door and tried to pull her out. And her husband, Mark Phillips, was pulling the other end. There was a tug of war going on. And she was very polite to the man. She just refused to get out. And then she said, "I think you better leave now," to the man. And he made his escape and was picked up by the police. So she has a very sort of dry sense of humour, rather like her father.
In June 1987, Anne was created the Princess Royal, a title traditionally carried by the British monarch's oldest daughter and held for life. She started undertaking public work at the age of 18, when her first engagement was the opening of an educational and training centre in Shropshire in 1969. Since then, she has established significant and ongoing relationships with a number of charities and organisations across the Commonwealth, and has one of the busiest working schedules of any member of the royal family. While she almost certainly will never become Queen, she still holds a significant role in the monarchy, not only as the daughter of a former monarch and sister of the current king, but also as one of the hardest working members of the family.
There's a great deal of respect for Princess Anne. She's someone who just gets on with the job with a very little fuss. She's not briefing the press the whole time. A lot of work she does is totally under the radar. She had 214 engagements last year, 2022, the most of any member of the royal family. I think people respect the fact that she just gets on with the job, doesn't complain. She was like that really as an equestrian. She'd fall off the horse and just get back on and not make a fuss. And this no-nonsense approach, which she inherits very much from her parents, is how she continues to this day. She's now in her early 70s. She's still very, very active, supported by her second husband, Vice Admiral Tim Lawrence, who again is a very effective member of the royal family.
I talked to Princess Anne about her visit to the camp. What impressions did you form of the work of Save the Children Fund here from your very short visit?
Well, it's certainly very much on the same basis as work in other camps, and in general with work that we do in a lot of other places in the world. And from what I've seen, I think really they're just beginning to get a grip of some of the problems. They've had their immunisation programme really only started in November, so some of it hasn't really taken hold yet, and they're still educating people to come and make use of the clinic facilities and the various programmes.
10 years later, a younger brother for the two, Andrew. Andrew has been quite known to be the more scandal-ridden brother, who unfortunately didn't make his name to be one kind to the ear. Andrew was born on the 19th of February 1960. He was the first child born to a reigning British monarch since 1857.
Well, Prince Andrew was born in February 1960 at Buckingham Palace. He was part of the Queen's second family. There's a gap of 10 years between him and Anne and 12 years with Charles. And the Queen was much more relaxed by this stage. At the time when the elder children were young, she was coming to terms with the fact she'd inherited the throne much earlier than was expected because of the early death of her father. But by 1960, I think she was much more mumsy with children, very close always to Andrew, always regarded as her favourite child. He was boisterous, he was good fun. He brought out the Queen, who was quite a shy person. He brought out one side of her. He was indulged and spoilt, I would say, to a certain extent, which has, in a sense, caused some of his problems in later life. But he was very different from his older brother Charles, who was, say, much more studious, rather sensitive. Andrew was known as a sniggerer. He was because he liked to laugh at his own jokes. He was always doing practical tricks. He would turn the antennae round at Buckingham Palace so the Queen couldn't watch her racing. He'd put bubble bath in the swimming pool at Buckingham Palace to it frothed up. He would tie the shoelaces of sentries while they were on guard duty. He was a bit of a pain, to be honest, but he was indulged. There was one moment when the grooms got so fed up with him down at the stables annoying the horses that he was thrown into the sort of dung pile, and then the poor groom thought he needed to resign, and the Queen said, absolutely not, that's how you should treat him. But he was always regarded as a bit of a handful. And I think he struggled really to find a sense of identity and trying to maneuver between these two worlds of being a son of the monarch, but also, in a sense, being brought up with other children. So he was a member of a scout cub pack that met at Buckingham Palace. He was sent away to school with many of his own relations, prep school called Heatherdown at the age of 8, and then went on to Gordonston. And he was, though his brothers Charles and Edward were guardian, and in fact head boy, he only ever became head of house, and I think that always rankled with him. But he was extremely good at sport, particularly good at cricket, and very quickly, I think, got the reputation of being, I suppose, the most charming and open of the Queen's children. Charles was jealous of his younger brother, said that he was the one with the Robert Redford good looks. He had this very big smile, beautiful white teeth, was athletic, very charming, very outgoing. Andrew was very confident. I think Charles is jealous of Andrew because clearly he hasn't had to do all the things that Charles has had to do. His life hasn't been prescribed in the same way. This must be a terrific burden to feel that you're going to inherit the throne at some point, and your whole life is preparation for that moment. Andrew was able to have a naval career, for example, which I think Charles might have liked to develop. He served briefly in the Navy and was very popular. Andrew also felt a bit jealous of Charles. Charles was the privileged one. He, is the one in effect who's going to inherit so much. Andrew's had to make his own way in the world.
Andrew attended the Gordonston boarding school in Scotland, as did Philip and Charles before him. He was briefly an exchange student at Lakefield College School in Ontario, Canada. After completing his secondary education, he entered Britannia Royal Naval College, BRNC, Dartmouth, in 1979 to train as a naval officer, following in his father's footsteps. Andrew completed the course at BRNC in 1980. He then underwent pilot training in both fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters and received his pilot's wings in 1981.
Well, Prince Andrew was sent away to boarding school at the age of 8, which is something the British tend to do. He went to a school near Windsor called Heatherdown. A lot of his cousins were at the same school. The Duke of Kent's son, for example, who's about the same age, was there. And he knew a lot of the children there. They were the children of his parents' friends. He proved himself not to be particularly academic, but to be very good at sport. And then at the age of 13, he was sent to Gordonston, the school his father had been at, up in the north of Scotland. Again, not very academic, but very sporty, particularly good at rugby and cricket and squash. And was very much had his what was called Andy's harem. The school had only just gone mixed. A lot of girls hung around him, and this is where he began to get the reputation of being Randy Andy. He spent 2 terms at school in Canada, at a school called Lakefield, very similar to Gordonston, a very strong outward bound ethos. You go canoeing and ice hockey, playing ice hockey. And I think that was quite a seminal rite of passage for him. He matured when he came back. But there was always a streak of rebelliousness about him and always a distrust of the press, which was to show itself in a series of embarrassing episodes later on in his career. He didn't want to go to university. He read English history and political science, economics for his A-level, but he went to Britannia, which is the Naval College, took on a 12-year service commission, short service commission there in the Royal Navy, but serving as a pilot. And was trained there to fly helicopters and then fixed-wing aircraft. And almost immediately after he graduated in 1980, the Falklands War broke out in 1982, and he was sent off with the task force to serve in the Falklands. And he pursued then a pretty conventional naval career, partly as an instructor, partly as a pilot. He commanded HMS Cottesmore, a minesweeper, for a period. He served in the Ministry of Defence. and he served 20 years, but he'd really risen basically as high as he could. The Navy and the armed forces have a system, but basically if you don't, it's up and out. You get to a certain position, the pyramid narrows, and he became lieutenant commander. He was in his late 30s, and it was time for him to go into Civvy Street. He was used as a decoy for Exocet missiles. He did casualty evacuation. He did a lot of search and rescue. And he was an integral part of Fleet Air Arms operations in the Falklands. And everyone has an image of him coming back from the Falklands, the rose between his teeth. The Queen had been adamant that he should be sent there if the ship he was serving on was going, and he should be treated no differently to anyone else.
As a young man, Andrew served in the Navy and was given the honorary rank of Vice Admiral in 2015. He was due to be promoted to Admiral in 2020, but his ceremony was postponed in the wake of his involvement in the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. The young Andrew was thought to be difficult from the beginning, and he was known as that young imp for his pranks, which included tying sentry shoelaces together and even pouring itching powder into the Queen's bed. It is said that his nanny, Mabel Anderson, called him Baby Grumpling because of his temper tantrums and obstinacy. But unlike Charles and Anne, Andrew was treated differently by his father. He delighted in his boisterous young son, who seemed far more like him than the self-conscious and complicated Charles. In contrast to Charles and Anne, who had been born before their mother became Queen, he had 7 nurseries in 4 palaces, endless sumptuous treats, and far more of his mother's attention. It is noted that he became his mother's favourite son.
I think the reason that Prince Andrew was the Queen's favourite son is partly she was quite protective of him. I think she realised there's an element of autism about him. He doesn't always engage with people. He talks at you sometimes rather than has a conversation with you. He's a slightly schizophrenic personality, because when he wants to be charming, when he wants something from someone who's important or someone he wants to charm, he can be pretty effective. He's very different from his brothers, who tend to be quite considerate and thoughtful. He's a much more brash and brusque figure, much more like his father, Philip. And perhaps because he's like Philip and because he's different from the other brothers, he appealed to the Queen. He made her laugh. He was very extrovert and gregarious. The Queen, who liked men in some ways more than she liked women, she responded to that.
Andrew married Sarah Ferguson, popularly known as Fergie, on July the 23rd, 1986. On the same day, he was created Duke of York, the title traditionally carried by the British monarch's second son and held for life.
The crowd asked for it, and the crowd got it. The kiss, the grand finale to a perfect day when everyone had difficulty suppressing a smile.
First impressions did you have of one another in that case?
Very good friends. A, very good friends, and B, well, it was at lunch, wasn't it? That
Yes.
We were made to sit next door to each other at lunch at Ascot.
And he made me eat chocolate profiteroles, which I didn't want to eat at all.
I then didn't have it, so I got hit. Then it
Very
started
hard.
from there. I think that's probably where it...
I was meant to be on a diet.
And that was the basis of a romance.
Yes.
There are always humble beginnings. It's got to start somewhere.
They had 2 daughters together, Princess Beatrice, born August the 8th, 1988, and Princess Eugenie, born March the 23rd, 1990. The couple unfortunately separated in 1992 due to a difficult long-distance relationship, and officially divorced in 1996. The year 1992 would prove to be the Queen's worst year, calling this year to be her annus horribilis. It was the year that all 3 of her children would separate from their partners. Although Andrew and Sarah separated, they still remain friends to this day. The Queen looked up to Sarah for always being there for her son when a lot of people had abandoned him. Despite worldwide grief, he is someone who always wanted the best for his children and made sure to always be there for them. That dedication of being the best whilst you're at your worst is something that a lot of people can take inspiration from.
I think Sarah and Andrew have been good parents. They've been always there for their children. They've been united. They haven't briefed against each other. They talk about being the happiest divorced couple ever. And the two children have gone on to, have successful careers, to get married and have children. Apart from some moments early in their careers, they've kept out of the headlines.
For the multitude, a memorable day. But still another treat is in store for the crowd, overflowing every available inch of the grounds before the palace. It's Her Majesty's appearance on the balcony with 3-month-old Prince Edward in her arms.
The Queen's youngest child was the only royal not to divorce. Edward, born on the 10th of March 1964.
A royal family reunion that finally breaks down the reserve of youthful Prince Andrew.
Growing up, it's fair to say that Edward had a pretty unconventional childhood. It's claimed he learned how to ride a pony when he was just 2 years old, and he was minded by a governess just like his siblings.
Well, I've known Edward since he was at Cambridge. He's a very shy, reserved, rather private person, very, very good actor. And I think as a young man, he could be slightly pompous and rather aware of his position as a member of the royal family. But I think the great thing with Sophie is she's softened those edges. He's a much more relaxed, easygoing figure, intelligent, probably the most intelligent member of the royal family, immediate royal family. And I think he's really grown in stature, and I hope he will play a much greater role in the royal family in future. And I think the royal family will rely on him as well as Sophie much more in the future. They're doing, I think they're number 3 in terms of the number of events that they do each year. Princess Anne's number 1, King Charles was number 2 last year, but they come up as a pretty credible 3rd.
Unlike his mother's relationship with Prince Charles and Princess Anne, Queen Elizabeth seemingly integrated Edward into her role, rather than leaving him with nannies. That made her much more involved with his life. He'd be left with his mother playing on the floor of her study while she worked at her desk on her state papers. His governess taught him early on at Buckingham Palace before he headed off to school. As a young man, he attended Gordonston School just like his brothers before him and studied history at Jesus College, Cambridge. After Cambridge, he joined the Royal Marines, but resigned his commission in 1987 in the middle of commando training. He worked briefly for musical theatre composer Andrew Lloyd Webber before setting up his own theatrical production company. This collapsed in 1991 with debts of £600,000, almost $1 million. He grew up to be relatively keen in entertainment. He formed the TV production company Ardent Productions in 1993, but later dissolved it in 2009 when its assets were reduced to just £40. Despite these ups and downs, Edward won respect for his attempt to be the first child of a British monarch to seek a career in the private sector.
Your company lost rather a lot of money at one stage, is that right? Has it been a bit of a struggle to keep going?
No, it hasn't. Like every company, you have to, especially in this particular business, you have to develop. You have to develop ideas, you have to develop relationships. It takes a long time to be able to gain people's confidences. It takes a long time, to develop the projects to a standard at which people, will accept them. And undoubtedly, being, in a sense, who I am in the company that we are, no commissioning editor wants to commission something that they think is just going to be of a mediocre standard. They want the best. If Arden is going to produce it, then they want the best. So the pressure is on us to be able to come up with almost better than average program ideas before we even start. And we took that really into consideration, and we developed our business plan on the basis it was going to take a minimum of 3 years for this company to be basically up and running, and you know, because it's just a long lead time. First year is development, second year is production. Now into our third year, we're actually beginning to see the product coming onto the screens, and that's the most satisfying element of it.
He was good company. He acted in something called Cambridge University Light Entertainment Society. He is, I suspect, if he'd had a different life, he would have wanted to be an actor. And of course, he started off running his own production company and working in the theatre. And I think that remains still a very strong love of his.
Your own job, you've got this production company going now. Do you find yourself fulfilled with that? Is that a role that gives you great pleasure and satisfaction?
Yes, it does. I mean, obviously, you know, being able to come up with ideas and turn them into reality is always a satisfying experience. And, you know, the more that we are able to do, the easier it becomes. But there are always swings and roundabouts and ups and downs and positives and negatives. And obviously, you know, having to go through these particular ordeals is always the downside quite often with these things. But no, it is fulfilling. It is good fun, especially when you can make programs of, you know, what I think of this particular quality and standard.
On June the 19th, 1999, Edward married Sophie Rhys-Jones, now Sophie Duchess of Edinburgh, a public relations consultant. On the wedding day, the Queen bestowed on Edward the title Earl of Wessex and Viscount Severn. Together, the couple have 2 children, Louise, born in 2003, and James, born in 2007.
Well, the wedding was a slightly more low-key affair. It was held at St George's, Windsor. I think there was a feeling, this was a period of great controversy with the royal family. There have been several royal divorces and separations, and I think they felt that they wanted to have their own much more private wedding in a place which is very close to the royal family's heart, in Windsor. Sophie had 2 difficult births, both with caesarean section, and it was an ectopic pregnancy with Lady Louise, and quite serious to the extent that Sophie's health was put at risk, and indeed Lady Louise's. So she had to be very careful after that. Well, Sophie, I think, was a change from previous royal births because she chose to have the children born in a National Health Hospital. I think, you know, all the way through, they've had a very sure touch about what works well with the public. They're very low-key people. They didn't want titles to their children. They felt that would, or at least they wanted to leave them to make a choice. And in many ways, she is rather like Princess Anne, the sense of getting on with the job, not making a fuss, and really putting duty above everything else. Edward had a series of girlfriends. There were even suggestions he might be gay. He's very close to Romy Adlington. It was really through a mutual friend that he met Sophie. They worked together, they got on well, the result is history.
May we ask, you've had a long time to test out your feelings. You're clearly very sure of one another now. What is it that makes you get along so well? You get along so well?
I don't know. I don't know. We just do, really. I mean, it's just...
I think we share a number of interests.
Yeah.
We laugh a lot. We have great friendship.
Yeah.
What made you decide to announce it now?
I don't know. What, announce it or actually decide to ask the question, you mean?
Get on. Married.
And so, no, it's just, I mean, it's impossible for anyone else to understand, you know, why it has taken me this long, but I don't think it'd have been right before, and I don't think Sophie would have said yes if I'd said before, and hopefully by the fact she did say yes, I must have got the timing right, so...
Could you give us some idea how you actually asked the question?
Ooh.
Well, I spoke it. So, no, I managed to take her completely by surprise. She had no idea that it was coming, and which was what I really wanted to do. I mean, the trouble is everybody always speculating always made it very difficult. Every time there was another round of speculation, I had to go very quiet again, so...
Did you say yes immediately?
I was slightly stunned for a minute, and then I suddenly realised I should actually answer the question, so then I said yes. I said, yes, please.
Even after Edward became an adult, his mother remained involved in his life. As a result, Both Edward and his wife Sophie were believed to be two of the Queen's most trusted members of the royal family.
Well, Sophie came from a sort of middle-class family. Her father ran a tire company. She went to sixth form college, was a secretary, and went to PR. But she's a very down-to-earth girl, very beautiful, actually. I mean, much more beautiful even in the flesh when you see her. And has turned out, I think, to be one of the hardest working and most respected and loved of the royal family. And I think the Queen recognised that very early on. She bought them a house, Bagshot Park, which was very close to Windsor, so she saw a lot of Edward and Sophie. And of course, Edward was her youngest child. He was the last to get married. And indeed, these are her youngest grandchildren, Lady Louise and Viscount Severn. Well, they're a very private couple. We saw them come out and cheer the National Health Service during the COVID crisis. They do a lot together through the Duke of Edinburgh Award. They share a lot of interests together. But they are a private couple, and I think in some ways, you know, the public respects that they have their own life. They still have, in effect, teenage children who are kept out of the glare, though we're seeing more of Lady Louise, who has inherited her grandfather's carriage driving skills, and indeed, I think, inherited his carriage. And I think they're pushing her forward more because they see that she is a very strong asset to the slimmed down royal family, a royal family that they want to appear is young and dynamic and engaged with ordinary life.
A picture editor go mad. Oh, please, sir. Who will go mad? A picture editor. Your picture editor. That's all he wanted, was it?
Could you just turn towards us with the ring?
Very quick. Thank you, sir. Thank you, please. This way, please.
Could you point the ring in this direction?
Sir. There you go. You've got your dark glasses on. Catches the sun, you'll all be blinded.
He also had an amazing relationship with his father, Prince Philip.
My father was always capable of being able to manage interviews in a way and say things that the rest of us always dreamed we could say.
Of course, it was for boys first, then girls came along, and initially you gave them their own section designed for living. And at that time, you thought that was quite impressive.
Well, what happened was that the Boys Brigade, the Scouts and the Army Cadets offered to run a trial. And that had been running about a year to try out the scheme. And the scheme was based on boys. I don't know why particularly, but it was. And while it was running, the girls said, we'd like to do it. And so I said, well, hold on a minute. Instead of getting the girls to do what the boys were doing, which seemed to be the normal practice, I said, well, let's have a scheme designed for girls. After about 25 years or whatever it was, we were had up by the Equal Opportunities Commission and told that everybody had to do the same scheme. So we then had the problem of trying to put the two together, and the girls weren't all that enthusiastic.
So you can always misinterpret someone's humour. You can turn it against them so that it sounds if it's not right. But you ask anybody who had the privilege of listening to him speak or any of the events that he hosted, it was always his humour that came through, and the twinkle in his eye, and he was very, very good at it.
Edward has moulded into a quiet and efficient figure who does not seek attention or acquire headlines. He and Sophie are liked for being dutiful and uncomplaining. Of all of Queen Elizabeth's children, Prince Edward has arguably seemed least interested in pursuing life as a royal and is the one who has most developed his own interests outside the family. Prince Edward was more interested in the arts than in outdoor pursuits such as riding horses, which was a favourite pastime of Queen Elizabeth. In 2002, the couple became full-time working members of the royal family. Edward was particularly involved in causes relating to the arts and athletics. In 2019, he was given the additional title of Earl of Forfar. 2 years later, Edward's father died, and his mother passed away in 2022. When Charles became king in 2023, he gave Edward the title of Duke of Edinburgh. All 4 of the Queen's children have moved on to create separate lives for themselves, and this is what the Queen has always wanted for her children. They have managed to grow old, have children, and also grandchildren. They have taken from their mother the importance of charity, the importance of duty and service, the importance of family, and live up to complementing their mother's reign one way or another.